they're just going to kill somebody else. I was like, a little numb. And I was like, they killed me 28 years ago.
How did you find your wife?
I didn't. That's where all the everything's roped off or taped off.
I followed the instructions of the dream. I contacted the Mormon church. They sent me their Book of Mormon, and she didn't meet the physical attributes of what I was looking for in a wife, but I felt like, hey, this must be the woman that God wanted me to marry.
Number 5, Oscar Ray Bolin. Oscar Ray Bolin was a notorious criminal whose name sent shivers down the spines of many residents in the state of Florida. Born in 1962 in Brooksville, Florida, Bolin grew up in a troubled household, with a father who was an alcoholic and a mother who struggled with mental health issues. Despite the difficult circumstances, Bolin was a bright and ambitious student who excelled in academics and sports. He went on to study at St. Leo University and later joined the U.S. Army, where he served for 4 years before being honorably discharged. Bolin's life took a dark turn in 1986 when he was arrested for the brutal slaying of Terry Lynn Matthews, a young woman who was abducted from a convenience store where she worked. Matthews' body was found 2 days later in a wooded area, and an autopsy revealed that she had been strangled fatally. Bolin's trial for the slaying of Terry Lynn Matthews was highly publicized, with media outlets covering every detail of the case.
The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged.
Not having to see his face constantly.
But all the other evidence that's been suppressed, I know about it. My attorneys know about it.
It's just more about the closure and
the time that we spent together, something inside both of us.
Natalie Blanche Holly had been stabbed about 12 times in her.
They hear what the state wants them to hear, what the prosecution wants them to hear.
Upper torso, and her body had been dumped about 12 to 15 miles from where her car was found.
The evidence to me doesn't support a conviction.
They don't.
I know Oscar Bolin better than anybody on this planet. It does not, and I believe he is innocent.
The trial was also notable for the fact that Bolin represented himself, arguing that he had been wrongly accused and that the evidence against him was circumstantial. Despite his efforts, the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to his demise. The case remained unsolved for several years until new evidence came to light, leading to Bolin's arrest in 1990. He was subsequently convicted of Matthew's slaying and sentenced to his demise.
My punishment's over. They're just going to kill somebody else. I was like, a little numb. I've been here 28 years now. I'm tired. It's not something, we all die, but it's in confinement.
And explain what that's like.
Imagine spending 28 years in this room.
So, I've been hearing you talk for the last 20 minutes, and you're going over the case, you're going over the evidence, and talking about...
Hard to deal with. I'm at peace with myself. The state's about to kill me. It's my release.
Over the years, Bolin became known as a serial slayer, as he was also convicted of 2 other slayings that took place in the 1980s. In 1986, he abducted and butchered Natalie Blanche Holly, a young woman who was working at a beauty salon. The following year, he took the life of Stephanie Collins, a college student who was last seen leaving her job at a restaurant. In total, Bolin was sentenced fatally 3 times. Throughout his time on the row, Bolin maintained his innocence, filing for a new trial. Despite multiple appeals and attempts to have his sentence overturned, Bolin's punishment was finally carried out on January 7, 2016, after spending almost 30 years on the row. Number 4, Robert Fratta. Robert Fratta is a name that will go down in history as a heinous criminal who orchestrated a chilling slaying that shook the entire state of Texas. Fratta was born on November 11, 1955 in Houston. He grew up in a large family and was the youngest of 6 children. Growing up, Fratta was known to be charming, charismatic, and highly intelligent. He was a star athlete in high school and went on to study at the University of Houston. After completing his studies, he joined the Houston Police Department, where he served for almost a decade before being fired in 1991.
But it was his bullet that tore through her brain.
Where is the incentive? If you want to get somebody to go kill somebody, shouldn't you have to give them a down payment?
When the man comes up on the scene, he doesn't ask, is she okay?
Shouldn't you have to give them some drugs or something? I mean, shouldn't you have to give them something?
And show it to her and say, is this the gun?
It was Bob Fratta who put it all in action.
He's not worried for the kids.
He didn't actually pull the trigger.
And then later on, I'm hungry.
In 1994, Fratta's life took a dark turn when he conspired to have his wife, Farrah Fratta, slain. Farrah was a beloved mother of 3 and a nurse who worked at a local hospital. Robert was angry with Farrah for divorcing him and taking custody of their children, and he saw her as a roadblock to his aspirations of remarrying and starting a new family. Robert hired 2 hitmen, Joseph Pristash and Howard Paul Guidry, to carry out the slaying. On November 9, 1994, Farrah was returning home from her shift at the hospital when Pristash and Guidry ambushed her and shot her fatally in her own garage.
How did you find your wife?
I didn't. That's where all the everything's roped off and taped off.
I followed the instructions of the dream. I contacted the Mormon Church. They sent me their Book of Mormon, and she didn't meet the physical attributes of what I was looking for in a wife, but I felt like, hey, this must be the woman that God wanted me to marry.
I guess to sum it up, basically, there was no romance and affection in our marriage. It was more like...
Not let emergency situations get you startled. So yeah, I learned that, but as far as you learn to control your emotions and...
It's starting to hit me now. I honestly thought there was a drug raid or something. That I can pretty much say I never did raise my voice to him.
Why did she want a divorce?
I didn't do anything to warrant a divorce.
Have you ever hit your wife?
I'm sorry? So that's why I walked over and didn't think too much of it.
The slaying of Farrah Fratta shocked the Houston community and the entire state of Texas. Despite his attempts to cover up his involvement, Robert was eventually arrested and charged with capital slaying. At his trial, prosecutors presented evidence showing that Robert had planned and directed the slaying, and he was found guilty and sentenced to the gallows in 1996. Despite numerous appeals and attempts to overturn his sentence, Robert Fratta's sentence was finally carried out on June 30, 2021, almost 27 years after the slaying of his wife. Number 3. Billy Wayne Coble. Billy Wayne Coble was a man from Texas who was fatally punished in 2019 for the 1989 slayings of his estranged wife's parents and brother. The case attracted national attention, not only because of the brutality of the slayings, but also because of the controversial circumstances surrounding Coble's demise. Coble had a history of violence and criminal activity. He was arrested numerous times for attack, burglary, and drug offenses. In 1989, he and his wife, Karen Visha, were going through a bitter divorce. On February 16 of that year, Coble went to the home of Karen's parents, Robert and Zelda Visha, with a shotgun and fatally shot them both. He then waited for Karen's brother, Bobby, to arrive and shot him as well. Coble fled the scene but was later apprehended and charged with capital slaying. Coble's trial was marred by controversy. His defense attorneys argued that he had a history of mental illness and had been mistreated as a child. They also claimed that the prosecution had withheld evidence that could have helped Coble's case. The trial judge denied these claims, and Coble was convicted and sentenced to his demise in 1990. Coble's case went through several appeals over the years, with his attorneys arguing that he had been denied a fair trial. In 2019, the Supreme Court of the United States declined to hear his final appeal, clearing the way for his punishment. Coble's punishment was also controversial. Texas uses a 3-drug cocktail to punish prisoners, but the state had run out of one of the drugs, so they decided to use a single dose of pentobarbital. Coble's attorneys argued that this method could cause undue pain and suffering, but their appeals were denied. Coble was sent to the gallows on February 28, 2019. Number 2. Clarence Ray Allen. Clarence Ray Allen was born on January 16, 1930. In Clarence's adult life, he would go on to be known as an American criminal who was fatally punished in the San Quentin State Prison by lethal injection due to his role in slaying 3 people. Clarence Ray Allen was 76 years of age when he was fatally punished in California. Allen would be the second to oldest inmate during that time to have been fatally punished since 1976. The punishment was couched in controversy. Allen was legally blind, diabetic, and relied on a wheelchair. He had suffered a heart attack the previous fall. Later, when asked that they'd just let him perish if he were to have another heart attack before his punishment date, prison officials said they could do no such thing. Yet when the press told the story of Allen's passing, the prevailing descriptions were of a man in fine health, not nearly as weak as described by the attorneys who had tried to save his life. Regardless of any last legal challenges or activist hysterics, this was a dangerous slayer, not a feeble old man, and Allen certainly had much blood on his hands. Sentenced to life in prison for slaying his accomplice in a 1974 robbery, he was then convicted and sentenced to his demise a few years later for ordering 3 more slayings while behind bars at Folsom Prison. In a state that had struggled to carry out fatal punishments for decades, Allen's demise could be seen as a righteous way to usher in what was expected at the time to be a busy era for the punishment chamber. Finally, Allen was fatally punished by lethal injection in 2006 at the age of 76. Number 1. Walter Leroy Moody Jr. Alabama fatally punished 83-year-old explosives detonator Walter Leroy Moody by lethal injection on April 19, 2018. Moody was the oldest inmate fatally punished in the U.S. since the Supreme Court reinstated the fatal penalty in 1976. He made no response when asked if he had any last statements. Moody built shrapnel-sheathed explosives hidden in packages rigged to explode when opened. In 1989, one of those explosives took the life of 11th Circuit Judge Robert S. Vance at his home, and 2 days later, another explosive took the life of civil rights attorney Robert E. Robinson. The Alabama explosive also seriously injured the judge's wife, Helen Vance. 2 other explosives were intercepted before they could hurt anyone. The devices bore similarities, including the same type of powder, batteries, and rubber bands that secured nails on the devices' exteriors, which led forensics experts to conclude they were made by the same person. Around the time of the attacks, an Atlanta television station received a letter threatening more attacks on judges, attorneys, and NAACP leaders. Prosecutors say the 1989 attacks stemmed from Moody's 1972 conviction for possessing a pipe explosive that exploded in his home, injuring his wife. He served 3 years in federal prison. That early attempt at a pipe explosive would later prove to be Moody's undoing. The same federal expert who worked to defuse one of the explosives Moody sent in 1989 recalled seeing similar work in Georgia years earlier. That put investigators on Moody's trail, and he was arrested a year later. Marshall, the Attorney General, said Moody had attended law school and was obsessed with getting his 1972 conviction overturned so he could practice law. When Moody appealed the verdict in the late 1980s, prosecutors say he concocted alternate evidence and testimony. He also petitioned a federal district court to vacate the conviction, but that court turned down the petition. That same summer, Moody and his then-girlfriend, Susan McBride Samford, began amassing the tools and materials he would need to build explosives. Moody was tried in both federal and state courts. He was convicted of dozens of counts, from slaying to obstruction of justice, and was sentenced to serve consecutive life terms without parole. In 1997, he was sentenced to his demise by an Alabama circuit court in Birmingham, eventually suffering his fatal sentence in 2018. That's all for today, folks. See you next time.